Thank you.
Great. All right, so let's jump into it. 0 to 1 product development. So a little bit about me. I grew up in New York City, moved to Los Angeles, California about almost 4 years ago now. So been out on the West Coast for a few years and living out here with my wife and daughter. A few personal hobbies of mine that I like to mention, and this will be relevant in some of the later parts of the talk, actually. I love scuba diving, fishing, hiking, traveling, reading. I love being outdoors and particularly doing water sports. And like I said, I'm a father. I have a 1.5-year-old daughter with my wife. So that's a little bit about me and what I like to do just outside of work. But in terms of actual kind of work experience that's relevant to the talk today and why I partner a little bit with Blix as well. I've spent a good chunk of my 10+ year career in technology, specifically focusing on media and entertainment products and companies. So started out, interning in college at a big media company called Viacom and an ad agency called BBDO. Went on to work as a rotational associate at Nielsen, which is a large marketing and measurement consulting firm. And there I sort of found my niche and passion as a product manager, which will inform a lot of the stuff that I'll talk about today. Just, sort of working through the process of developing products and working in an organization to get those done, I think is fairly relevant to the topic. I actually took a step down from being a product manager at Nielsen to do a little bit more data analysis and data science work at a company called Freewheel, which was a startup. And then transitioned over to another product management role at Spotify, where I was working on helping Spotify monetize its free product. Did that for a few years and then went on to a company called Quibi, which was a streaming startup that didn't last too long, but was producing short form videos on mobile. So I helped build a monetization product team there. And that leads me to where I am now, which is at Apple as a lead product manager on Apple's services business. So you might know some of the services like iCloud, Apple Music, Apple TV Plus, et cetera. So I work on our ecosystem strategy, which means I help figure out how to get those services out to different partners through technology solutions. So that's a little bit about me and my journey. And then outside of sort of the professional stuff, I've done some work in terms of professional development through courses like General Assembly, Product School, Silicon Valley Product Group, and Pragmatic. And I also love volunteering and mentoring. And so I've been involved with the Posse Foundation, which is a scholarship program here in the US, and of course with Blix, which I just recently got involved with through Carl, who's a coworker of mine and the co-founder of Blix. So really excited to be here, and it's definitely a passion of mine to sort of mentor and share knowledge. So I'm glad I could be here. Aside from kind of work experience, professional development, one thing I wanted to mention was I've also interviewed at a number of different companies. And I think this is relevant to say because some of the material that we'll cover today are things that I've learned actually from both applying them in my job and things that I've learned on the job, but also actually through interviewing at a bunch of these companies that have done excellent jobs at doing 0 to 1 product development and building products that we all love and use almost every day. So I just wanted to mention that, as some of the material does actually come from that interview experience as well. I want to mention a personal hobby of mine, and it's going to transition us into the 0 to 1 product development talk, and that is fishing. And you might be wondering, why am I talking about fishing, and why did I show a picture of this? So fishing is a hobby of mine. It's I love it for a lot of different reasons, but the main one is it's relaxing, it's rewarding. It requires like experimentation, it's challenging, it requires you talking to people, and I actually think it's very similar to product development. You might ask, all right, well, why is that? Well, I want to start off with 2 quotes, both from my dad. One is they call it fishing, not catching. And the second is the only thing I ever caught was a colt. And I mention these because these are sort of funny stories and quotes that I think get you through the challenges of fishing and maybe product development. You're going to try it and experiment and do a lot of different things. It might not work. And you might fail actually, but that's okay, right? Because you keep coming back the next day to try different things. So I just wanted to mention that. I thought that was kind of a funny way to introduce the concept here. Well, you think about fishing, right? You have to figure out what's your why. Why are you going to get up and go, potentially at the crack of dawn to go out and fish? What's your why? Why are you getting out there to do it? Are you fishing in the right spot and for the right type of fish? Are you using the right bait, tackle, and technique, right? Are you talking to other people to understand what they're doing and if it's working well? And maybe you might catch your first fish, right? Based on the steps you do before that. You might come back tomorrow and maybe double your catch with what you've learned. And then maybe you'll even open a sushi restaurant with all the fish you're catching if you're really successful. But said another way, you're sort of doing these steps within that framework. You're defining, you're developing, you're communicating. And then hopefully, once you have figured out how to really nail those first three steps, you could potentially scale and even monetize your product or business. So that's very similar to sort of these steps. To sort of the stages of fishing, right? You're doing all these things, you're hoping for success, you're experimenting, and then you're trying to scale what you did and what worked well. And hopefully it results in a lucrative business, right? So that's really going to be the outline of the talk today. We're going to talk about defining, developing, communicating, growing, and monetizing. In terms of definition, we'll talk through things like problem mapping, how to do market research, how to figure out your target market and your personas, and really craft a vision or problem statement that captures what you're trying to do and why. In terms of development, prioritizing features, figuring out what we call product market fit, which you might have heard of already, and figuring out how to iterate that and repeat as well. Communicating with stakeholders and customers, and then hopefully eventually growing to be able to scale to more markets and customers, and monetizing, figuring out how you're going to make money off of your product. So let's jump into it. So the first stage here is define. And so when you're defining what problem you want to solve, there's a bunch of ways you can go about it. There's so many different, market factors that affect when and how you approach a problem, right? One framework that I've used quite a lot in the past is, and I've seen at other companies is this what's called a PEST model. It's looking at like what are the political, economic, sociological, and technological trends and influences that are bringing these problems about in the marketplace. So an economic one, really relevant now, right? A lot of global inflation, consumer confidence is down. So are you going to try to launch a product that solves a problem for helping people save money? Or you might not want to choose a product that solves a problem that no one has in this specific type of economy. Something like sociological, right? Like your lifestyle. Do you want to build a product that fits into someone's lifestyle neatly, or maybe even forge a new type of lifestyle vertical or product? Technological, right? One example I like to use here is when Spotify was starting to develop its solutions for how it was going to launch in the United States, they were riding the wave of mobile application development. And before that, it was just a desktop application. And so they were really one of the first sort of apps and businesses to really adopt, the advantages of mobile and mobile streaming. And that was one technological trend they were able to ride that sort of helped them grow the company into what it is today, back in 2011. So the examples of questions you want to ask yourself sort of along this framework of, what's the right type of problem to solve based on what's happening around me. You don't want to sort of jump into something that doesn't feel right. So you definitely want to do market research and figure out where your problem is going to come from and how it's going to be relevant. Some of these problem categories might be things like an underserved market, right? There might be customers who have only a few solutions to solve a problem. and they're sort of underserved in what's available. There might be a non-existent market. So an example here would be, something like social media. There was no sort of alternative or product that was serving that need in the market when it came out, right? That was a non-existent market. You want to use design elements, meaning once you figure out if there's an underserved or a non-existent market, how do you make that problem? How do you solve that problem in a way that incorporates design thinking? And design thinking is it innovative? Is it easy to use? And is it easy to understand? Those are the types of solutions you want to come up with for that problem. And what's your value proposition to customers, right? When you talk about the problem you're solving, whether it's saving time or making your commute faster, or making this item cheaper, or letting you spend more time with loved ones, like what's your value proposition to customers? Again, that fits into this market. And I think once you start to dial into figuring out, which one of these you're going to tackle, what you want your value proposition to be, it's going to make that problem statement really easy to communicate and for people to understand and get behind your vision. Once you've sort of figured out, how you're going to solve these problems, you want to start thinking about the people that it actually impacts, right? You want to understand your customers really well, and this is something you hear all over technology, but just in the market in general. We want to be customer centric and user centric, and that includes understanding whether or not your customers are primarily business owners or enterprises or consumers. That's a very important distinction, because the value proposition to a consumer, right, might be different than an enterprise. The design elements, sometimes enterprise software doesn't necessarily need to be innovative or that easy to use. It just needs to get the job done. And I know I'm using a lot of software examples, but you could really insert any type of sort of problem here, and it would apply. So really think about that enterprise versus the consumer lens, and understand your customers really well, so that you can solve their problems well. One thing that I find super helpful in understanding customers and communicating the value of those customers to the folks that are helping you build this product or think about things is what we call a persona map. And typically you can base these off of sort of broad groups or cohorts of people, and you might create kind of this archetype customer that you're thinking about in the back of your head when you're figuring out how to bring a product into the market. So some sample things you might want to think about are goals, pain points, right? Expectations. Do they expect to have a product in the market that is 5 times cheaper than an alternative, or what's their willingness to pay, for example, could be an expectation. Their pain points, right? Think about it from not just pain points around that specific problem, but what are pain points in their day in general? And this can help inform, if you build a central product around a problem they're having, how do you expand that product out into other pain points that they may be having within their day? And then goals, right? What is this person trying to accomplish? What are their dreams? How can your product make that a reality for them, or be a part of that for them? One other thing to think about is the journey, right? And this is more getting sort of into the way that the product is marketed or understood by the customer. How do they consider or evaluate what your product is doing, right? What are they thinking when they're purchasing or after the purchase? And then also, what are the touch points in terms of the experience? What are the touch points they're having throughout their journey with your product that are either positive or negative? One way that we like to measure that, at least in the product development space, is by something we call NPS, which is Net Promoter Score. And that's, if somebody were to recommend your product, would they be a very strong recommender, or would they be what we call a detractor, somebody who's not going to recommend it at all? So you think about all those touch points and how that experience is affecting them in terms of how your product is getting out to them. Touch points could be things like, customer service, a website, a retail experience, actually using the product and troubleshooting it, et cetera. So think about all those things, in terms of the journey and the experience when you're doing the persona mapping. And then insights, right? There's a lot of insights you might gather from user research or talking to folks about how they feel about things. And you might want to use some of that feedback in refining the product as well. So this is a great exercise and template to use to start thinking about, again, user centricity, to think about people who are actually going to use the product or are already using the product, and keep them in the back of your head when you're solving problems. The other thing that you can do is, once you have a bit more of a qualitative understanding of the people who are going to be, in the market for this, one useful exercise is to actually start sizing how many of those people there actually are. And this is a popular way to look at it. A lot of VC firms and different companies look at the total addressable market, as well as serviceable addressable market and serviceable obtainable market. So once you figured out that group of people and what problem you're solving for them, how many of those in the entire world or in a certain geography could potentially benefit from that? Then you might want to drill down into what's the serviceable addressable market. How many of them can we actually serve and reach? There might be 1 billion people that could benefit from this, but we might only be able to reach 500 million based on your marketing budget, or based on your ability to get a message out there, and based on their willingness to pay. And then that brings you down into perhaps a smaller bubble, which is the serviceable obtainable market. So what's the actual realistic number you could get within a given time period? So it's great to have a broad goal of, maybe we want this thing to impact 1 billion people, but we think that in the short term we can get to 500 million, and out of that 500 million, we think that 10 million of them will be really advocates of our product, and will love this service, at least for the first sort of release of it. So that's a way to take, again, the qualitative pieces of what you're looking at, and then being able to quantify how many of those people are there, so you get a sense of how big this product could be. And then once you've figured out, again, the problem and the people, make a problem statement, right? Make sure it's plainly stated. Again, it's researched and validated with that market research, the pest sort of analysis, the personas, the user research, and it's validated with some numbers too, right? So you want to have both qualitative and quantitative measures of that problem. Here's one, for example, from Google, right? They have a very broad sort of vision statement, but I kind of like it. It's to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. And for them, the entire world is a cut. Well, I'd say Google wants the entire world to be their customer, right? They want everyone to find value in accessing information. So it's easy to understand their mission. They want to organize that information and make it universally accessible. And so you could think of, that's the problem they're solving. And from that, there's dozens of products that actually could accomplish that. There's search, right? There's maps, there's YouTube, there's Gmail, right? All these sources of information that solve a central problem for lots of different people that actually spawn off into separate products. And so that's why it's useful to have this problem statement, because the products will flow from that, and you'll start to design around the people and the mission. So that's really important. So yeah, I think, again, you should try to figure out a problem statement that aligns with the target customer. And it also helps you communicate your product in 10 seconds or less, and it helps get people excited. One story I like to tell is, and I told this on the last call that I did, or for the last Blick session I did around career development, was at Apple, there's sort of a story that people tell about Steve Jobs, where if you got into an elevator with Steve Jobs, and you had maybe 20 or 30 seconds with him, he would turn to you and ask you, what are you working on and why is it valuable to Apple? And you'd have to be able to explain that in, potentially 15 to 20 seconds and make it really compelling. And, it's kind of kitschy and funny, but it really communicates that value of, like, this is why I'm excited about solving this problem, who it's for, and it's really easy to understand and get behind. So just an anecdote there about why these vision statements and problem statements are really important to communicate and capture kind of what you're doing. So one thing I encourage you to do is think about your own vision statement, right? What types of problems can you help others solve? I want to make the world's best transportation app that helps you save 30 minutes or more on your commute for people in the United States, right? And what makes you better at it than another person? Another piece to that might be, well, we do it in a way that, you know, reduces, I don't know, a carbon footprint, or you know, creates value for transit companies and riders. So that's an example of how do you think about a problem that you can solve, and how do you do it even better than what's available in the market? That's your value prop. And then the last thing you want to do in the definition section is to define your goals. So what we're looking for is called product market fit. And this is the gap between, again, when you're looking at your target customer and their underserved needs or problem statement, where is it going to fit relative to the solution you design? And this is where we're going to talk about the development phase next. But you're essentially trying to bridge the gap between what you're doing in the definition section and what you're developing. And when you bridge those gaps and you find that customers love what you've built and it solves their problem, that's when you found product market fit. We'll talk a little bit about what that is in some slides coming up. So that's the definition section. Just do a quick time check. Okay. So next you want to move on to developing. So once you've actually figured out, you know, how you've defined your problem and your people and your statement, let's actually get on to the building and the development phase. Right. Development steps might be things like prioritizing and scoping. So if you have a very broad problem like the one I just mentioned, right? You want to build a transportation solution that saves people 30 minutes on their commute. That's a huge problem that could have many different solutions to solve. So you want to prioritize and scope how you're going to actually solve that in the first run. Then you want to actually execute and build it, right? And test it, and then you're going to repeat. So that's the formula we'll talk about. One way that's really good to prioritize kind of how you're building solutions for those customers is a framework called Circle. And Meta actually uses this a lot in their interview process and in their actual product development. But the Circle method is basically comprehend the situation, identify the customer, report the needs. That's essentially what we did in the definition section, right? Where we talked about the personas and understanding their goals and their pain points. But then the next step is to cut through and prioritize. And so that's looking at, okay, using that example of the transportation app, how do we say there's potentially 4 different solutions that we could use to solve this transportation problem, right? And it's looking at, again, the customer's needs. Well, we might say the customer needs public transportation. The customer needs a better way to drive their car and carpool. The customer needs potentially a way to save on gas, right? There's sort of different needs that they have, but you want to prioritize based on what is the most important to that customer. So you want to list them out and actually figure out which of these is most important, and then start to dive into the solutions that you want to deliver. And then you might evaluate some of the trade-offs between focusing on one or the other, and then summarize. So in terms of actually prioritizing the needs, like I mentioned, there's sort of 3 or 4 that I kind of mentioned off the top of my head. You want to look at each of those, and one helpful way to prioritize is to use what's called RICE. It's actually a kind of a way to score each of these different ways to solve the problem. That gives you an objective, sort of quantifiable way to make trade-offs between the way that you're going to solve this problem. And so the formula sort of incorporates different metrics like reach, impact, confidence, and you divide sort of the outcome of that over effort. Reach here is like, if you look at your total addressable market or your serviceable market, how many of those folks are you going to be able to reach with this particular solution, right? So if I talk about the public transit solution and sort of making public transportation better in that problem I mentioned, maybe that only reaches 40% of the population in the United States, for example, because only only 40% of the US has solid transit infrastructure. The impact might be, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10 or whatever measure you want, how much time is it going to save them? And the confidence is, how confident are we that we could actually build a solution this big in a given amount of time? Maybe it's really tough. Maybe we only have 50% confidence versus building something smaller where we have 100% confidence. And then you want to divide sort of the outcome of that over effort. And effort is the cost of doing it from time, resources, and money. So here's an example of a prioritization sort of table. This is sort of an e-commerce example, but I think it's still relevant. So you look at, we've got 4 different types of features or ways to solve a particular problem, which is around authentication and commerce. Each of these has a reach score, right, and an impact score. So it looks like this biometric authentication, right, for example, has the highest impact score. Sorry. We have a confidence measure, right? How confident are we that we can get this done? And then effort, right? This is actually going to be a pretty low effort project, but it has high impact and reach. So it's a no-brainer that maybe we might pick this particular way to solve the problem. And this is a great way to communicate why you picked that way to solve the problem as well and make trade-offs, right? Because someone might say, well, actually, we're only 25% confident on this, but we're 100% confident on this. And you can start to have conversations about how to make those trade-offs. And in terms of actually understanding the inputs into that model to sort of rank what you're doing, there's a couple of things. And again, you don't need to use all of these. I'm just sort of listing out different ways to understand how to sort of rank and keep these in your head. But one such thing is the Kano model, which is you look at customer satisfaction and the actual functionality of what you're building, and then you start to plot out, if we have these different sort of features or ways to solve the problem, how do we plot those out on this graph to see which of these is going to be really exciting for customers versus which is just table stakes, basic things that we need to offer for the customer. And so this is a great way to figure out a great model to use to sort of plot and understand your impact, right? And so we might say, okay, the impact is actually going to be really minimal, and the satisfaction might be sort of minimal as well if we deliver something very basic that copies whatever else is on the market. But if we choose to focus on an attribute that really gets customers excited, has high functionality and satisfaction, we might use that as a way to trade off what we're going to build first. So this is a great way to plot some of these sort of impact attributes on a graph like this. When you're thinking about level of effort too, right? And when I was talking about some of these inputs, right? The level of effort. One way to measure your effort is actually on how much it's going to cost you to acquire a particular customer. And so we use, especially in the tech world, there's models around what we call lifetime value and customer acquisition cost. So essentially, if you're measuring your effort, you might say, we want to actually go after a feature or a problem-solving product that prioritizes a low customer acquisition cost and a high lifetime value. And you might build some of those features into your first version, or talk to the marketing team, or talk to different folks about how do we get our product scale to sort of represent this, right? The value of my customer is higher than what it costs me to acquire them. Therefore, my effort is going to be lower when I want to try to sell this to them or acquire more customers. So that's a great input for the effort piece as well. Another piece that might go into the effort is around sort of design sprints. So how long is it going to take us or the design team to build something around this that we can get out, right? And typically a design sprint is sort of broken up into mapping, sketching, deciding, prototyping, and then testing, actually getting that out there, right, into your your minimum viable product. Another level of effort input might be from engineering. Again, and I talk about this a lot from the sort of the technical side, but this could be from other stakeholder groups that you're working with, right? You want to go to engineering and partner with them so that first they understand what the actual problem you're solving is. So again, that's where that problem statement really comes in handy, and understanding the why. The engineering team might go off and estimate, based on this this table, right? Might go off and say, okay, we'll try to estimate how much it's going to take to build this integration or this dashboard or this authentication piece. And so it's helpful to, again, put that into your prioritization table and talk to engineering about how long that's going to take, or insert whatever your stakeholder is and figure that out. So once you've figured out and sort of ranked all of those features, and you're good to go, and you've aligned with the folks who are going to help you build it, and you figured out your target customers and why they need your solution, you can then communicate that, but then start to execute and create goals for your first release of this product, right? A good framework that a lot of folks use that came from Google is the OKR framework, objectives and key results, which some of you may have used already. But it's essentially, where do you want to go, right? And how are you going to get there? So an objective for the transportation might be, okay, we figured out that we want to focus on a transit solution that saves you time commuting. Our objective is to get 1,000 people using this and save them 20 minutes on their commute. The key results are going to be, how you're actually doing that, which might be developing the product, testing it out, getting adoption from out of that 1,500, and then having them refer another 500. It's figuring out what are your objectives and key results to actually get to that goal that you're trying to validate for your solution. And then you want to ship what we call a minimum viable product. This is a very popular sort of framework that's used in Silicon Valley. It's that prioritized list of problems you're solving and solutions that addresses the most important user needs. It's ruthlessly prioritized, again, from partnership from those different folks. It has inputs from your personas, your total addressable market, and it's intended for you to find that product market fit, again, which is that gap between your definition and your development. And then you can pivot this based on how it's working in the market, right? You don't want to put it out there, and if it's failing, just call it a day. Like, you can keep working on it, keep pivoting and figuring out how to get it back to where it needs to be based on your objectives and key results. And then you want to measure, right? So you can measure product market fit with lots of different things. One of the models I mentioned was the customer acquisition cost and lifetime value. Is your customer acquisition cost really low relative to the value you're getting out of customers? Then you may have found product market fit. And there's other ways to do that, but I particularly like that way of looking at it. Also, you want to measure usage and what we call golden behaviors. Golden behaviors are essentially ways that people use your product that are indicative that they'll stick around or that they'll recommend it. And for one example is, I know for Netflix, or maybe it might be Spotify, is if you listen to at least X minutes of music within your first 30 days of subscribing to Spotify, for example, and if you create at least 1 or 2 playlists, that's a predictor that you're more likely to stick around than someone who doesn't. So figure out what those golden behaviors are and how people are using it. And if you can measure that and figure out how you find more people who do that and sort of repeat their usage, that's a good way to measure whether or not your minimum viable product is doing a good job in the market. And then you also want to measure things and understand friction and engagement and retention. Again, these are mostly focused on sort of technical digital products, but you could think about this in the retail sense or e-commerce as well, right? Are people having friction in any part of purchasing or understanding the product or activating it? And how do you remove that friction in your second version so that you can reprioritize what you're doing to solve the right problem? and then measuring again how well people are engaging and how well they're retaining on your service or product. The next sort of phase is you want to communicate. So once you've done all this work, you've actually defined and developed, and you've got something out in the market, you need to communicate with your stakeholders and your team, but also you need to communicate with your actual customers too. One popular way to communicate is by using a roadmap, and product management uses this a lot. You typically use either like a technical roadmap or a commercial roadmap, and it's essentially just showing a chart and a series of events that are happening by a team, by a particular release or a product, and windowing it by time to show, this is the impact we're delivering for each of these types of problems that we're solving within each of these teams or areas. So you could imagine, one of these could be our mobile app, our retail presence, our e-commerce experience, right? There's different streams of work that are happening throughout all these windows of time. And it's a great way to communicate to your stakeholders why you chose those features or products to prioritize, like we showed previously, and what the actual work that you're doing is to execute against those and what the goals that it's solving are. So this is a great way to encapsulate a lot of that thinking into something that's easy to share, easy to debate about, and make trade-offs. So a roadmap is a great way to do that. Another way is to do demos. As you're building the product, or even as it's out in the market and you're starting to test it, you want to demo progress, share progress, preferably every 2 weeks or sort of more, but do it on the timeline that makes most sense for you and your stakeholders, because I can tell you that developing products in a bubble or in a vacuum without getting feedback or without showing anyone is a recipe for disaster. And I've certainly experienced that in my career. And so demos are really important to get feedback. Not all the feedback is going to be that valuable, but you still want it. And it's just good to parse through that and figure out how you're going to incorporate that back into your development process for the second version. You also want to communicate with customers. And this could take many forms, but I'm sure all of us have been in contact with a favorite business of ours through either customer service, through a survey, et cetera, or even some of you might have participated in a user study. These are companies and teams want to know how you're actually using these things. And again, going back to the persona mapping, they want to understand whether or not they did a good job of matching what they think your needs are versus what your needs actually are. And so you want to talk with your customers, right? You want to understand what's impacting them, what makes sense to them in the product and what doesn't. And I see this work well with focus groups, user research. There are things called ethnography studies, where they actually go and sit in your home for a week and sort of observe you. There are lots of different ways to do user research and sort of tease out a lot of different things, like what's your overall experience through the journey of the product. Is it actually usable? What's painful about using it, and what are your goals? What are the mental models that you're in or that you're using to solve a problem? So, this is a great way to sort of look at it 360 and talk to your customers about whether or not what you're building is solving their problem. And then the last sort of section here is around growth. So once you've actually, figured out the best way to scale your product and you found product market fit, you might want to figure out, how do you grow the business? Again, talking about product market fit, right? You've figured out that your definition meets your development in this product market fit gap. And hopefully your cost to acquire your customer is lower than the lifetime value of the customer, right? So you want to make sure that you're driving long-term growth with this product market fit. And one way you can tell is if the product market fit is not working long-term, the scales might turn. That's a good indicator that you need to go back and start to redo a lot of the exercises you did in the beginning and start developing new types of products, new features, new ways to sell. Those are all indicators that there's work to do, right? If this gap is showing up again, once you found it or after you found it. Again, you might want to revisit your total addressable market, right? If this product market fit suddenly disappears after 6 months, we might want to say, okay, well, what happened to our addressable market? Or even what happened politically, economically, socially, technologically, that is impacting my product market fit? What are the bigger trends that are making this product harder for people to adopt, or maybe it's not solving a problem that's legitimate anymore? A good example actually is using the social media example is with social media. Social media is having at least some of the legacy companies are having a tough time. The chasm between product market fit is getting bigger for some of their customers. And so they may need to, go back and revisit what's our addressable market? How are we actually servicing them well? That's a great example of something where, there's bigger macro trends happening that are impacting their business. So they need to go back and do some of that. You want to revisit your circle exercise as well. Are you prioritizing the right things for the customer? Are you making sure that you're taking into account how you're actually going to solve these problems going forward? And this is a good way to revisit a little bit of that in your prioritization if you found yourself in a gap with that product market fit. Again, revisit your sort of RICE assessment here. Maybe that the addressable market that you're reaching is smaller. Maybe the impact to that smaller market is bigger. And maybe you have more confidence that you can deliver a different solution with less effort, for example. And so this is all part of the sort of rinsing and repeating piece of product development. Is you're going to have to do these exercises over and over, because there's a very high likelihood that whatever you release in the first iteration is not necessarily going to solve the problem at the scale that you want to maybe make it into a business or to justify more investment, et cetera. And so a good way to think about these are all exercises that you never just do once. You just keep doing them over and over until you find that product market fit, until you've found whatever your secret sauce is, whether it's golden behaviors or whether it's lifetime value, whatever your measure of success is, you want to keep sort of rinsing and repeating these. One way, and speaking of goals, one way to think about how you're making impact towards your goals, again, this is very focused on a digital product, but is to split it up into some categories around what are your goals, right, when you're trying to scale. And so we might say, okay, one of the things that we know produces a very high amount of revenue for us is when a user refers one of their friends, right? But we have a very low conversion rate, meaning there's very small amount of people who are going to do that. And so maybe, this is a high value goal for us to grow. We might want to focus on building and looking at that RICE framework around features that help us refer customers, right? We know we're going to have to hit a lot of customers because we're only going to get 1% of them to do this, but it's going to yield $10 every time they do. So that's one example of a goal that you might want to focus in on and build a product or experience around once you have a scaled product. So that's really, once you've sort of taken something from zero, where it's just, a concept or an idea, to one where it's something out in the market, this is sort of getting to 1+. This is like a 1.5, a 2, et cetera. It's helpful to look at frameworks like these and dial into what are your most important actions that your customers need to take that help you survive as a business, and how do you focus your product development efforts around really optimizing for those. Another interesting one is signing up for a free trial. Let's say you really know that you have to activate a certain number of people in order to hit a revenue goal or in order to retain certain customers. you might need to, focus really on the trial experience and experimenting there. So this is just a sample way of looking at these different pieces and understanding where you're going to focus your efforts for that 1.52 version of the product. And then execute. So once you've sort of done all this and repeated everything, you might want to build more minimum viable products that solve more problems for those high value customers. And you might want to ship and experiment on those as well. So, that's a good way to think about this. It's a repeating cycle. And the last piece here is around monetization. This is the typical sort of Silicon Valley model around this is you build the biggest product or solution possible, you get as many people using it, and then you figure out how to monetize. That model may or may not be on its way out. It depends on who you ask. But I think for the sake of this exercise, it's helpful to just think about it in this way. But one way to think about monetizing, once you've had that sort of 1.5, 2 version of your product, is to start building what's called a business model canvas. So once you've figured out how you're solving the problem, you might have built key partnerships or sort of key resources or activities that you're doing. You might know the value proposition already because you have product market fit and you're talking to your customers about what works for them. It helps save me time. It's made me more efficient. It's made me more effective at my job, et cetera. So you know your value propositions. You can leverage your customer relationships, right? The breadth and depth of your customer relationships, and then understand the channels that you're using, whether it's e-commerce, digital, retail, et cetera. And then you probably already understand your customer segments from doing some of the persona mapping as well. And then you want to think about your cost and revenue, right? So cost structure around, how much is it really costing me to, run this business at scale, and how much revenue do I need to deliver for it to be profitable? Right. So this is a very high level way to model out, once you have a product to market, how you're going to monetize or scale it. This is strictly for, sort of when you get to that stage. Everything before this is just focusing on, am I solving the right problems at scale for the right group of people in the right way? And then again, you want to keep experimenting. Develop a monetization roadmap, right? Test on different, perhaps cohorts of groups of users, right? The way that you make money from one group of users is not going to be the same way you make from another. And a good example of this, for example, is a family plan for a streaming service, right? There are certain types of customers who really benefit from having a family plan or multiple profiles versus a college student who's just trying to pay the least amount of money for their service, right? So there's different ways that different types of users respond to a monetization plan or the way that they pay. And you want to understand the best way to do that based on what you're selling and who your customers are. Gather some insights, right? And then look at the competitive advantage you have against alternatives when you're building a monetization plan. Back in the early days of social media or some of these other products, the advantage that Meta and these companies had was around the data that they could collect on you. Not the best business model, but that was their competitive advantage, right? And they used that to create a monetization business that worked really well for them. I think that monetization model is sort of on its way out, and we're thinking more about subscriptions, et cetera. But think about what your unique advantage is that positions you to monetize your product really well amongst your customers where you don't lose them. And that's all I have for today. Just to recap, product development is really framed around definition, development, communication, scaling, and hopefully monetizing your business or your product. And you want to always find out or keep the customer or the user at the center of what you do and make sure that you're solving the right problems for them. The ways you do that could be by talking to them, by talking to your partners like engineering, design, marketing, and other folks who are helping you build something, and start to prioritize the way that you're going to solve that problem and build a solution or product around it. And then hopefully you can repeat that cycle to find product market fit, to acquire customers at a price that's lower than the value that they give you, and then figuring out how to expand that problem solving and prioritization to continue to sort of maximize the customer value you're providing. So that's all I had for today. And I'd love to just pause there and take any questions that folks have.
There are a few questions in the chat. Do you have visual in the chat or do you want me to read them out?
Yeah, I will take a look right here. Okay, so the first one is from Stefan. How did the agility and product development change from company to company that you worked for? What I've seen often is that the large company structures prevent quick innovation by involving many stakeholders, policies, et cetera. Yeah, that's a good question. So I've worked for a large spectrum of companies, from very small startup to all the way to giant company like Apple. And you're absolutely right. It is different from company to company, and not every company is as agile as you know a sort of a young startup. But what I will say is, in the young startup, you're able to do these types of exercises and model out a roadmap or a way to solve a problem, and experiment in many different ways. And that's sort of what you have to do just to survive or get funding or have a runway, et cetera. But in a bigger company, I'd say you are doing the same thing. It's just over a longer time horizon, and the way that you communicate and manage trade-offs just has to come with a lot more data and a lot more alignment. So you are actually doing the same things. I think that you're right. The difference is there's just a little bit more that you have to prove, and a little bit more insights you have to give in communicating to your stakeholders. Typically with a startup, in my experience, has been, you got an idea, cool. We probably need to generate 15 ideas and try them all to see what works. With a big company like Apple, we actually might generate 15 ideas, but each of those 15 ideas is just way more consequential because of the scale we have. So we just have to be very careful about making sure that those 15 are the absolute best and they're all aligned within the organization. So that's what I'll say sort of to that question.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. The next one is from Janet. It says, how do you discover pain points early on for an idea for a product or app? Is there any specific way to go about it? I think, yeah, discovering pain points actually can come from many different places. One of them is to actually think about your own self. I find that the best problems come from things that you experience yourself. And think about the pain points that you have in overcoming that problem. So my first piece of advice is think personally about what it is that you want to solve. I think the second thing is, if you're doing it for a group of people that don't necessarily reflect your same problems or needs, again, it's going out and talking to those people and just asking them very plain questions, not about the solution you're trying to get at, but trying to understand who they are and what they do in their day. So for example, if you're trying to figure out a solution to a problem and you want to save people commuting time, you might not go to a person and say, hey, if I built this, would you use it? Or, hey, if I were able to do this, what do you think about that? It's more asking questions like, tell me what you did yesterday. How long did it take you to get to work? Do you wish that you could have been doing something else while you were commuting to work? What do you typically do when you're sitting in traffic? Like when you ask those types of questions, you start to understand the actual deep pain points, and you'll probably get more information out of those people than if you ask a very pointed question about a solution you're thinking of. So that's my advice is, again, think about it personally from your perspective, and for people who are different from you, ask them sort of very general, broad questions, and you'll start to get an idea. All right, the next one is from Kweku. To add on, what tools are useful to find pain points and the behavior of particular personas? I'm sure some of it is gut feel, but what do you do when your gut feel is not sufficient? Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a bunch of different ways and tactics to like sort of map the personas and figure out pain points. I think you can sort of intuit and use your gut to figure out like certain things about people. But one other way is to, if you don't rely on your own research, is to start to look at sort of external research. We do this a lot at Apple and sort of big companies and other places, but it's what are the big trends or behaviors that we're seeing across the market that are common across a lot of different people, and then I help you validate some of your assumptions, right? So it's essentially like it's kind of like checking your own homework. It's like, okay, I have a feeling that there's an increase in people's desire to do this. What in the market is telling me that that's true, right? So an example might be, I have a hunch that, okay, people streamed a lot more content during COVID, but I actually don't have any clue how much and if that's something that they want to continue doing after COVID is over. So that's something where you can gut check against sort of external research, figure out what trends are matching and which aren't. And then for the ones that aren't, try to dig deeper and talk to people about what the differences are. Let's see. So the next one was from also from Janet. In terms of the MVP, will you still ship it out to the masses, including a strategic marketing strategy? Also say the MVP does not do well, then how do you reassess and perfect the next MVP, although your brand is attached to the initial MVP, which would not fare well? Yeah, that's a good question. This is very relevant because you might encounter a bad taste in people's mouths from a product that you shipped that didn't do too well. I think that the whole point of the MVP is for it to be small enough where you could potentially pull it or pivot it very quickly. And that's why it's called minimum viable product, right? It's the minimum experience that gets you feedback from your customers or helps you assess whether or not you're going to get any lifetime value out of them. Whether it's hey, can you pay 99 cents for this thing? If not, okay, we pull it off and then we offer it for free for a little bit. And then we see if we can get adoption, for example. That's a quick and easy experiment you can run, for example, to figure out the value you're going to extract from customers without sort of, for lack of a better term, pissing them off or getting yourself in a situation where you make the wrong impression. You want to think about strategically about how you make those trade-offs because that is a very real impact that could happen. And I think customers today are very sensitive to those types of things. So you want to think about that and really plan around it. And then sometimes there's no getting around it. If you develop something bad and your name is out there, I'm sure there's creative ways to get around it, like changing your name or doing things like that. But that's a good question. You should consider that when you're making trade-offs around how you're going to build your MVP so that you mitigate that risk. So next one's from Janet. When would you say a business plan should be done and what should be included? I would say a business plan is great to have when you're doing the definition portion of the product development. And I'd say the business plan might be very high level at that point, and that's okay. Just talking about customers you're going to solve, what partnerships you need, how to get distribution, et cetera. So the business plan is good to have at the definition stage. I'd say as you're continuing to develop and scale and monetize, the business plan will continue to grow and get more detailed. But you should have at least an outline of it or something high level in the beginning. It's a good communication tool. It's a good way to, especially if you're raising money, for example, to show folks what your plans are. And it gets more sophisticated and more detailed over time as the product grows. So next one's from Rosemary. What motivated you to product development? If you went back and could choose change your career, what would you choose? Would you choose the same? That's a good question. What motivated me to do product development and product management in particular was first of all, I like building things. I'm a builder. I like to do that type of stuff. I also like to work with a lot of different types of people and debate and talk about data and things like that. So for me, it was a good mixture of building, but also building products, but building relationships with people to get feedback, to build the right thing. I particularly like that about product development and product management. If I could go back and change what I'm doing, would I choose the same? I probably would, maybe not in like the digital product space, maybe something, like a physical product. I could see myself doing that, but I do enjoy sort of the process of doing a lot of stuff. Maybe I would have chose something different other than software. Yeah. Let's see, from Kweku, have you found that many of these frameworks like Rice and Kano are executed and used verbatim in the workplace? Are they internalized by each team member and just core to your behavior as a product org? Yeah, I think those are very like formal frameworks. And They just have sort of these names and titles to them. I think a lot of it is, every company you go to will have its own version of that prioritization. Sometimes it's not written down and it's just more fluid and it's like you have to sort of learn it and figure it out. And sometimes it is more formal. For example, at my time at Spotify, it was very formalized, where we had OKRs, we had a prioritization table, we had all these different things, and it was very structured. Versus my time at Quibi, it was a lot more fluid because we had to move faster and decisions were being made with sort of less justification around a framework or a line of thinking. And I'll tell you, at Apple, it's also fairly structured, again, because the trade-offs and the impact that you make could be across 1 billion users. So it has to be really well justified across some type of framework or thinking. So while it might not be those specific models, every company you work at will have some level of a framework or way to communicate these things that helps you understand the impact and the trade-offs. Okay, so Alex, if someone is looking to get into product marketing, specifically in big tech, any advice? I'd say advice would be, that's a good question. Let's see. If you can figure out what a product manager or product marketer does in their day and start to either find those people in your own company, work on side projects that demonstrate some of that thinking. So even some of the cool things I've seen are candidates who are interested in breaking into the industry they'll take an existing product that's on the market, break it down and talk about their recommendations about how they would do something differently, how I would release Google Maps differently, how I would market this new enterprise product, et cetera, and almost do like a little mini case study. It helps you do that on your own. It helps, if you're interviewing or talking to folks and say, hey, I've got this thing to share with you. What do you think? That's a good way to start thinking about that, but also just talk to the folks that you work with if those functions are there already. See how you can start helping them and getting involved in projects there. But start slow and start from a place of learning and sort of being willing to learn as well. So the next one is from Dan. For the business model candidate, is it ideal for a startup versus a classic business model? I think, let's see. I'd say usually a startup is using the business model canvas just because it's starting out new. Most, again, these are not, I'm not being prescriptive about using all of these specific things. These are things that I've seen and used in my career. You can use whatever works well for, classic business modeling, et cetera. I like the canvas because it thinks holistically about a lot of different areas and it's easy to communicate. It's one thing we use at Spotify. So you can use whatever you want. Let's see. What role do you play in selecting product teams from a lead PM point of view? So I don't, I guess I'm a little confused by the question. It says, what role do you play in selecting product teams? I don't select product teams. I'm a lead PM for multiple lines of business and products. So lines of business are things like music, TV, podcasts, iCloud, et cetera. So I don't necessarily sort of select product teams or hire product managers. I'm actually an individual contributor, but my lead role is just across different lines of business and products. So that's a little bit about me.
Thanks. Sorry
yeah.
to interrupt, but yeah, it was my question.
Yeah.
Let me put my camera on as well. Yeah, so I think, you kind of got my question. I guess I'm just thinking about myself and how I, develop myself so that I maybe get in a position where I'm, managing lines of businesses or leading other product managers. I just wanted to understand. Yeah,
no, it's a good question. I think what I've done throughout my career is just, you try to level up the scope that you take on, or even start working on things that are outside of your job description. I know not everyone likes to hear that.
No, it's the truth.
Yeah, but yeah, it's, especially, for example, working, like when I came into work at Quibi, I was hired to lead the advertising monetization team, which was my experience that I had I'd done a lot of that work previous to coming there. But as some people started to transition out of the business or work on different things, there were gaps where I needed to just fill in, right? So it's kind of all hands on deck. So if you can find areas where you're stretching yourself and maybe 10% of your work is like, I have no idea what the heck I'm doing, that's a good thing. I think you want to take on a few projects where you're like way out of your league, where maybe you're not expected to deliver the like full solution, but you can be a part of the team. And that's how you start building up that scope where you can start working across more lines of business, more teams, et cetera. You sort of have to take on those unknown, scary projects, and do the best you can and learn from them. And then you can start to sort of add that to your resume of things you've done. And that helps you get increasing scope and trust from people to sort of lead bigger things.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Let's see. How long should a startup do market and product research before going to market? That's a good question. This highly depends on a couple of things. I think you don't want to spend too much time in like the research and definition phase, because it really is just the start. You really want to focus a lot of your efforts on the development and experimentation and scale phases. That's actually where the learnings happen, and that's where it's more important to sort of learn is by doing versus defining and staying in research too long. I'd say it depends, because if you're in a market that's highly competitive, you may not have time to do market research or wait. But if you're in a market that's non-existent, and an example here I'll give is if you're building a virtual reality product, maybe you were building it 5 or 10 years ago, you probably have to do like a year or two of research or market testing, et cetera, before you even start building something. That's way different than if you're building a streaming service that has 10 alternatives. You have to work really quickly and get something out into the market because your competitors are actively working against you. So it really depends on what the domain is, what the problem you're solving. Some might require a lot more research than others, and then some you might have to just do the bare amount and then really get into the development and validation stage. Let's see. So from Alex, would you recommend working at some of the places you worked at earlier, like Spotify and Viacom? Yeah, Spotify was great. It's if you're into like product development or they sort of wrote the book on a lot of modern product development practices and were able to scale really well. So I have a lot of good things to say about Spotify, and the culture is also great there as well. Viacom, I can sort of speak less to because it was a while ago, but they're doing a lot of exciting stuff in the media space. But yeah, I've had very positive experiences at all the places I've been at, and would recommend all of them. Let's see. So from Janet, she said, can you just explain RICE again? How would you, as an early stage startup, calculate this? I feel like this is a big startup / companies will have an easier time breaking this down than early stage startups. Yeah, so I'll go back to the RICE thing. There we go. So I'll actually go back to this table here. Here we go. Yeah, so as an early stage startup, it's a good question, because if you're super early days, and let's say you only have 1 or 2 engineers, this is going to be harder to do than if you have maybe 10, 15 engineers, or if you only have very limited market research about reach, right? And so it's a good question because you may not have the resources or the time to do something like this, and so it may take on a different form, which is actually, we're going to need to build maybe, let's say 2 out of 4 of these or 3 out of 4 of these. This is what I was talking about with my experience at Quibi, is we had to move really fast. And so we were sort of making these calculations on the fly or doing the best we could. And sometimes we were figuring out the reach and the impact after it was shipped. And so that's okay too. It doesn't necessarily have to happen after. But what's useful about this is if you've got that information after you shipped it, you can then input it back into the model, and then sort of rank it against other things that are out in the market. And you can figure out where to invest your time in resources into improving things. So if you've got some MVP out in the market, let's say we use the biometric authentication as an example. We've got something out in the market that helps you log into a product. And we find that actually only 10% of our customers actually use this form of authentication. So the impact is actually pretty low, even though our confidence behind our effort was low based on what we thought we were doing before we shipped it. Those are inputs you get after you ship it that actually might deprioritize how much time you spend on biometric authentication. That's just a quick example here. So it's a good question. And this, you might need to input some of these after you've shipped something in the market. That doesn't always happen, in this order. And then from Shankar, any career tips on how to pivot from product manager for internal B2B products to B2C tech? Yeah, good question. This is a transition I made about midway in my career. I was working more on enterprise stuff and transition into consumer product. One tip I would have is understand the difference between your enterprise customers and your regular consumers. Understand the differences and the similarities. So if one of the big differences is, for example, the sales cycle and the consideration factor is a lot longer for an enterprise customer versus a regular consumer. Another difference is enterprise customers tend to not completely abandon a product because the sales cycle is a lot longer. They paid for it over a year, so they're probably not going to just stop using it, versus a user who, a customer who is using an app every day and doesn't like something in it can just delete the app or go away or stop paying for it, right? So I think that the biggest thing is to understand the differences, but understand the similarities between the two of them. And then, start to do work around taking your experience in the enterprise space and applying it to, how could we take that same concept into the consumer space and just, scale the sales cycle down smaller or something like that. So it's just figuring out how to translate from one to the other. There's no really clean way to do it. Again, going back to one of my other answers, you could take on work that stretches you to start thinking a little bit more about a consumer. If you work at a place where there is a consumer offering, take those stretch assignments. But again, think about the differences and how to translate and communicate that. Great. I think those are all the questions from the chat. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions on the line.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, no problem. Let's see. I think we have one more. Cool. Anyone else have any other questions?
Just another question for me. In your role at Apple, do you tend to do the demos yourself?
So the demos are usually in combination with the design team and the engineering team. So we'll all get together and we'll say, okay, we want to release or we want to show this VP, this particular feature or product that we're building. First of all, you might only have 5 minutes to show them something, and the product might be really big or the experience might be big. And so you want to figure out like, what's the fidelity of the demo you want to do? And what stage of the development are you at? Sometimes we just show a bunch of slides with screenshots or wireframes. Like, here's generally how it's going to work, and here's an idea. Versus we might have a prototype that you can click through or a video you can interact with that's a little bit more high fidelity, all the way to a working demo of a piece of software that we're going to click through. So it all depends on, how much time we have, what stage of the process the development is at, who we're meeting with. And then, yeah, we get usually the designers and the engineers in the room to help demo because they may be able to answer questions that the product manager or other folks, don't have as much depth on.
Thank you.
Let's see. Alex asked, with everything happening in tech, would you still recommend a transition? That's a good question. I think, yeah, there's been, again, going back to that, this table, right? Just want to show this real quick. Sorry. This guy right here, right? There is a lot happening. You think about the technology market across all these 4 categories. there's a lot happening, right, in terms of consolidation, overhiring, growth, et cetera. I think it all depends on what you want to do from two perspectives. One is like the domain of technology you want to go into, whether that's hardware or software, subscriptions, et cetera. And then what you actually want to do within that field, whether it's software engineering, product marketing, product development, marketing, et cetera. I think anytime is still a great time to get into tech if you consider those two things. What I recommend, going to Meta as a software engineer right now might be a little tough, or to Twitter as a software engineer might be a little tough. But some other emerging fields to go into as a product manager or a software engineer, absolutely. I think it's just do your research, figure out what the needs are, where there's low supply or demand, where there's low supply or high demand for specific types of things, and that'll help guide your maybe what area of tech you get into. All right. Well, if no one has anything else, it was great to chat with you all today. I really enjoyed our time together, and thank you so much for asking really good questions too. I really appreciate it, and I'm glad everyone was engaged and got a lot from the topic.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Matt, for being here. And thank you everyone for joining us.
All right.
Yeah.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.